Some plans work exactly as intended. Others work too well. Sebastian Pemberton's plan was supposed to be simple. Choose a woman who embodied everything his mother despised, marry her, and watch as the great Pamela Pemberton finally lost control of the empire she valued more than her own son. Wanda Reeves was perfect, brilliant, fearless, and from a world his mother would never accept. What he never calculated was how completely she would dismantle every wall he'd built around his heart. Now, as her scent still lingered in their empty penthouse and her accusations burned through the paper in his trembling hands, Sebastian faced the ultimate irony. The woman he'd chosen to be his weapon had become his weakness. And the truth about why he'd really selected her, the secret he'd hidden even from himself, was about to cost him the only thing that had ever made him feel alive. Because sometimes when you think you're playing someone else, you discover you've been playing yourself all along. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our royal story family. Your throne in this kingdom of stories is waiting for you. The passionate journey you're about to witness has brought together thousands of beautiful souls just like you. Before we begin this story of hearts and hidden agendas, I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a bustling city or a quiet countryside, drop your location in the comments below. Let's see just how far our royal family stretches across this magnificent kingdom. Sebastian Pemberton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline without really seeing it. The city lights blurred through the glass of scotch in his hand, this third of the evening. Behind him, his mother's voice continued its relentless assault, each word precisely aimed to wound. "The Sterling merger is non-negotiable, Sebastian," Pamela Pemberton said, her voice as cold and hard as the diamonds that adorned her neck. Catherine Sterling comes from 5 generations of old money. Her grandfather sits on the board of every major financial institution in this city. Her connections are exactly what Pemberton Industries needs. Sebastian drained his glass and set it down with deliberate control. At 38, he was the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, yet in his mother's presence, he still felt like the neglected 10-year-old boy desperate for her approval. "And what Catherine Sterling needs is my last name," he replied, turning to face the elegant white woman who had given him life but little else. "Let's not pretend this is about business connections. You want me to marry your friend's daughter because she fits your idea of a suitable wife for a Pemberton." Pamela's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her purse. "She is suitable, unlike your usual distractions." The implied criticism of his past relationships hung in the air between them. Sebastian had dated actresses, models, even a championship equestrian, all beautiful, accomplished women, all white, wealthy, and ultimately boring. None had lasted longer than 6 months. "I'm not marrying Catherine Sterling," Sebastian said with finality. "Not now, not ever." Pamela rose from her seat, her silver blonde hair catching the light as she moved. Though in her 60s, she remained a formidable presence, board chairwoman of Pemberton Industries and the controlling shareholder since his father's death 15 years ago. "You have 3 months, Sebastian," she said, her voice deceptively soft. "Either you find someone appropriate, or I'll exercise my voting rights to replace you as CEO. The board already has concerns about your independent streak." The threat wasn't empty. Sebastian had been fighting his mother's influence for years, trying to modernize the company while she clung to old connections and older methods. As she swept toward the door, Sebastian felt the familiar burn of resentment flare into something dangerous. "This isn't over," he called after her. Pamela paused at the threshold, a cold smile touching her lips. "It never is with you, darling. That's why you keep losing." The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Sebastian fought the urge to hurl his empty glass against the wall. Instead, he turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. Blonde hair perfectly styled, custom Tom Ford suit without a wrinkle, blue eyes cold with calculation. His mother was right about one thing. This was a war, and he was tired of losing. 3 days later, Sebastian sat in the back of the Pemberton Industries boardroom, observing rather than leading the emergency meeting. John Steele of Apex Capital was making his case for a hostile takeover of their Asian subsidiaries. His presentation slick with threatening projections and veiled ultimatums. Sebastian had intentionally arrived late, choosing to let this particular drama unfold without his immediate intervention. His mother sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable as Steele continued his assault on their company's value. In conclusion, Steele said, his confidence bordering on arrogance, Pemberton Industries is facing obsolescence in the Asian markets. Our offer represents a generous lifeline rather than the market correction that's inevitably coming. A heavy silence fell over the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Pamela opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the tension first. Your entire premise is fundamentally flawed. All heads turned toward the young black woman who had spoken. She stood confidently at the opposite end of the table, her voice clear and commanding. Sebastian straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Wanda Reeves, Financial Strategy, she introduced herself, nodding respectfully toward the board. Mr. Steele's projections ignore three critical factors that completely invalidate his conclusions. Without waiting for permission, she stepped forward and connected her tablet to the presentation system. The screen shifted to her own slides, meticulously prepared and devastatingly precise. First, Pemberton's market position in Singapore and Malaysia isn't weakening, it's evolving. Her fingers flew across the tablet, bringing up charts that contradicted Steele's claims. Our revenues are transitioning from traditional manufacturing to high-margin technology services, which Mr. Steele conveniently excluded from his analysis. Sebastian watched, transfixed, as she systematically dismantled Steele's proposal point by point. Her dress was modest, yet perfectly tailored to her curves, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that framed her face. But it was her intelligence that commanded the room, razor-sharp and unflinching. Finally, she concluded, Apex Capital's own subsidiaries are over-leveraged by 47%, according to their latest SEC filings. This hostile offer isn't about Pemberton's weakness. It's about Apex desperately needing our liquid assets to shore up their own precarious position. Silence fell again, but this time with a different quality. John Steele's face had gone from confident to ashen. The board members were looking at Wanda Reeves with newfound respect. Even Pamela seemed begrudgingly impressed. Thank you, Ms. Reeves, Pamela said, her tone carefully neutral. The board will consider all perspectives before responding to Apex Capital's offer. As the meeting broke up, Sebastian overheard two board members talking just outside the door. Who is that woman? One asked. I've never seen Steele taken apart so efficiently. Reeves? She's some wunderkind from the financial strategy team. Brilliant, obviously. Came from nothing. I heard she grew up in public housing in Chicago. Scholarship to Princeton. Not the usual Pemberton executive mold, but clearly effective. Sebastian froze, the words echoing in his mind. Came from nothing. Not the usual Pemberton executive mold. A slow smile spread across his face as an idea began to form. Dangerous, complicated, and potentially perfect. That evening, Sebastian sat in his home office, the light of his computer screen illuminating his face as he scrolled through Wanda Reeves' personnel file. 32 years old. Grew up in Southside Chicago. Single mother who worked 3 jobs. Full scholarship to Princeton. MBA from Columbia. Hired at Pemberton Industries 4 years ago. Promoted twice since then. Her performance reviews were exemplary. Exceptional analytical skills. Uncompromising work ethic. Refuses to be intimidated by senior executives. That last one made him smile. He'd witnessed that firsthand today. He closed her file and opened a new document, typing quickly. Candidate assessment. Background, working class, public housing, mother will be horrified. Education, elite but scholarship, no family connections. Appearance, beautiful, black, maximum social disruption. Temperament, fearless, direct, will stand up to mother. Professional value, brilliant strategist, useful for business. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, contemplating what he was about to do. It was extreme, even for him, but his mother had pushed him to the breaking point with her ultimatum. If she wanted him married to a suitable woman in 3 months, he would give her exactly the opposite. Wanda Reeves was perfect for his purposes, not just as a brilliant mind who could help him wrest control of the company, but as the ultimate weapon against his mother's outdated prejudices and control. Pamela Pemberton, with her old money sensibilities and carefully curated social circle, would be horrified by a daughter-in-law from public housing, a black woman who had earned her position through sheer brilliance rather than family connections. "She'll do perfectly," Sebastian murmured, closing his laptop with a decisive click. The next morning, Sebastian arranged to, accidentally, encounter Wanda in the executive coffee lounge. He timed his arrival precisely, stepping through the door just as she was adding cream to her coffee. "Miss Reeves," he greeted her, noting how she didn't startle at his sudden appearance. "Your performance in yesterday's meeting was remarkable." She turned to face him, her expression professional but guarded. "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. I was just doing my job. Saving the company from a predatory takeover goes somewhat beyond the job description, I'd say." He stepped closer, extending his hand. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, Sebastian Pemberton." "Wanda Reeves," she replied, accepting his handshake. Sebastian held her hand a moment longer than necessary, using the opportunity to study her reaction. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and unintimidated. No nervous giggle or flirtatious smile. Just the confident poise of a woman who knew her worth. "I've been reviewing your work," he said, releasing her hand. "Your analysis of our Asian market strategy was particularly insightful." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she controlled it. "I wasn't aware the CEO personally reviewed mid-level strategy documents. I make it my business to identify exceptional talent," Sebastian replied, moving to pour his own coffee. He positioned himself close enough that their arms nearly touched, observing how she neither moved away nor showed discomfort at his proximity. "Would you be interested in dinner this evening? I'd like to discuss some ideas for restructuring our international division." The invitation was deliberately ambiguous, professional enough to accept, personal enough to create questions. Wanda studied him for a moment, her dark eyes analytical. "Is this a business dinner, Mr. Pemberton?" she asked directly. He smiled, appreciating her forthrightness. "Let's call it a preliminary discussion that could benefit us both. 7 o'clock at Oriole." She considered him for another moment, before nodding. "I'll be there." "Excellent." Sebastian stepped back, coffee in hand. "I look forward to continuing our conversation." As he walked away, he could feel her eyes on his back, assessing, calculating. Good. He needed her sharp mind engaged, needed her to see him as an intriguing puzzle, rather than just a privileged CEO. The game had begun. Over the next 2 weeks, Sebastian orchestrated several more chance encounters, each carefully designed to build Wanda's impression of him as professionally interested in her capabilities. A discussion about market strategy in the elevator. A request for her input during a department meeting. Each interaction allowed him to study her responses, confirming she was as independent and intellectually formidable as he needed. Their business dinners progressed from professional to increasingly personal, though Sebastian was careful to maintain plausible deniability. He shared selective details about his strained relationship with his mother, his vision for modernizing the company, his frustration with the board's resistance to change. Wanda, in turn, gradually revealed her ambitions, her pride in her achievements, her determination to succeed in a world that had given her nothing. By the third dinner, Sebastian knew she was perfect for his plan. The question was how to propose a marriage of convenience without revealing his true motives. He found his opportunity when Wanda mentioned the glass ceiling she faced at Pemberton Industries. "The old guard will never fully accept someone like me in upper management," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "No matter how exceptional my performance." "You're right," Sebastian agreed, leading forward. "The company is still controlled by people like my mother, people who value family connections over merit." "Then why pursue me for these discussions?" Wanda asked directly. "If you know the system is rigged, why pretend I have a real shot at advancement?" Sebastian set down his glass, his expression serious. "Because I want to change the system, and I think we could help each other do that." "I'm listening. I need a wife," he stated bluntly, watching her expression shift from interest to surprise. Not for romantic reasons, but for strategic ones. A business partnership that would benefit us both. Wanda's eyebrows rose. That's not where I expected this conversation to go. Let me explain, Sebastian continued smoothly. My mother has given me an ultimatum. Marry someone suitable within 3 months, or lose my position as CEO. She has someone picked out already, a society princess who would help maintain the status quo. And you're suggesting? A marriage of convenience. 1 year, potentially renewable, if mutually beneficial. You would gain immediate access to the executive level as my wife, with all the connections and opportunities that position provides. I would retain control of the company and gain a brilliant strategic partner who shares my vision for modernization. Wanda set down her glass, her expression unreadable. Why me specifically? There must be dozens of ambitious women in the company who would jump at this opportunity. It was the crucial question, the one Sebastian had prepared for carefully. Because you're exceptional. Your mind, your determination, your unwillingness to be intimidated. I need someone who can stand as my equal, not just a convenient placeholder. He didn't mention that her background and race were central to his choice, that she was the perfect weapon against his mother's prejudices. That would come later, if at all. And what exactly would this arrangement entail? Wanda asked, her analytical mind already examining the proposition from all angles. We would present ourselves as a genuine couple. Shared residence. My penthouse has more than enough space for privacy. Joint appearances at company and social functions. A prenuptial agreement protecting both our interests. After 1 year, we could discreetly divorce with generous compensation for you, or continue if the arrangement remains advantageous. And physical expectations? She asked bluntly. Sebastian maintained eye contact, his expression neutral. None. This would be a business arrangement, not a personal one. Wanda was silent for a long moment, studying him. Sebastian waited, knowing better than to pressure her. Finally, she spoke. I'll need the specifics in writing. Salary, position guarantees, compensation package, privacy clauses, exit terms. And time to review everything with my lawyer. Sebastian nodded, careful not to show the triumph he felt. Of course, I'll have the documents prepared tomorrow. I haven't agreed yet, she reminded him. But you're considering it, he replied. That's all I ask for, now. 3 days later, they sat in a private conference room at Pemberton Tower, the contract between them on the polished table. Wanda had arrived with her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who had negotiated several improvements to the terms. Sebastian had accepted them all, knowing they didn't affect his primary goal. Everything appears to be in order, Wanda's lawyer said, closing her portfolio. If you have no further questions, Ms. Reeves, I'll give you privacy for the final decision. After the lawyer left, Sebastian and Wanda faced each other across the table. The contract lay between them, 50 pages of legal language that would bind them together in a calculated charade. Are you certain about this? Wanda asked, her pen poised above the signature line. Once we sign, there's no going back without significant consequences. Sebastian met her gaze directly. I'm certain. Are you? She studied him for a long moment. This is the strangest business deal I've ever considered, but yes, I believe the terms are acceptable. She signed her name with a decisive flourish, then slid the contract across to him. Sebastian took the pen, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. Something electric passed between them at the contact, a momentary awareness that made them both pause. Sebastian recovered first, signing his name below hers. As he set down the pen, he looked up to find Wanda watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Congratulations, Mr. Pemberton, she said with the hint of a smile. You've just acquired a wife. And congratulations to you, future Mrs. Pemberton, he replied. You've just joined the executive team. They shook hands to seal the deal, but this time the contact lingered. Sebastian found himself noticing details he'd deliberately ignored during their negotiations. The softness of her skin, the warm brown of her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips. A warning flashed in his mind. This woman was meant to be his weapon against his mother, not a distraction. Yet as they stood there, hands still joined across the contract that bound them together. Sebastian had the unsettling feeling that his perfect plan might have one unexpected variable he hadn't accounted for. Himself. What would make you consider a marriage of convenience? Is there any deal that would be worth giving up the chance for true love? Share your thoughts in the comments. The wedding was a small, private affair, exactly as Sebastian had planned. No elaborate ceremony that would give his mother time to interfere. No society photographers to document the occasion. Just a civil service at City Hall with Remy Gibson as Sebastian's witness and Wanda's brother Trey as hers. Trey Reeves had made no attempt to hide his suspicion of Sebastian. Tall and protective, he pulled Wanda aside before the ceremony, their hushed conversation intense. Sebastian couldn't hear the words, but the concerned glances Trey shot in his direction made the message clear. He doesn't trust you. He thinks I'm using you. He wasn't wrong. The irony wasn't lost on Sebastian as he slipped the platinum band onto Wanda's finger. Her hand was steady, her expression composed, but he noticed the slight acceleration of her pulse at her wrist as he held her hand. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian brushed his lips against hers in a kiss that was meant to be perfunctory. Instead, the brief contact sent an unexpected current through him, a jolt of awareness that had no place in a business arrangement. "Congratulations," Remy said afterward, clapping Sebastian on the shoulder. His oldest friend's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Life is full of surprises," Sebastian replied smoothly. "Yes, it is," Remy agreed, his gaze shrewd, especially when they're carefully orchestrated. Before Sebastian could respond, Wanda and her brother joined them. Trey's handshake was firm, to the point of challenging. "You've known my sister for what, a month?" he asked bluntly. "That's quite a whirlwind romance." "When you know, Sebastian replied with practiced ease. "Wanda is exceptional. At least that part wasn't a lie." She stood beside him in an elegant ivory sheath dress, her natural beauty enhanced by minimal makeup, nothing flashy or ostentatious, which perfectly suited Sebastian's purpose. His mother would be expecting him to marry some attention-seeking socialite, not this composed, intelligent woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. "We should go," Wanda said, checking her watch. "The reservation is for 2 o'clock. The small celebration lunch passed without incident, though the undercurrents of tension remained. Trey's protective watchfulness, Remy's knowing glances, the occasional moments when Wanda's hand would brush against Sebastian's, creating that same disquieting awareness. By late afternoon, they were in Sebastian's private elevator, ascending to the penthouse that would now be their shared home. They stood side by side, not touching, as the floors ticked by in glowing numbers. "Your brother doesn't approve," Sebastian observed. "Trey has seen me work too hard to get where I am," Wanda replied. "He's concerned this is impulsive." "And what did you tell him?" "That I know exactly what I'm doing." She turned to face him as the elevator stopped at the penthouse level. "Do you?" The question hung between them. As the doors slid open, Sebastian stepped aside to let her enter first, buying himself a moment to compose his response. "I think we both know what we've signed up for," he said finally, following her into the foyer. "A mutually beneficial arrangement." Wanda nodded, but her eyes held a question he couldn't quite decipher. "Then let me see where I'll be living for the next year." The tour of the penthouse was brief and practical. The shared spaces, living room, kitchen, dining room, all designed in modern elegance with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Then the private areas, Sebastian's master suite to the east, and the guest suite to the west that would become Wanda's. "I've had the closets prepared for your things," Sebastian explained as they entered her suite. "Your assistant coordinated the move while we were at lunch." Wanda ran her hand along the edge of the king-size bed, testing the luxurious duvet. "Very efficient." "I believe in addressing practical matters promptly," Sebastian said, remaining by the doorway. This was her space now, and he was conscious of establishing appropriate boundaries. "The staff has been informed of our marriage. They're discreet and well compensated for their discretion." "And what exactly have they been told about the nature of our relationship?" Wanda asked, turning to face him. "Only that we were married today, after a private courtship. The details of our arrangement remain between us." Wanda nodded, then moved to the window, looking out at the spectacular view of the park. The late afternoon sun cast her in golden light, highlighting the elegant curve of her neck as she stood in profile. "It's a beautiful cage," she said quietly. "You're not a prisoner, Wanda," Sebastian replied, surprised by her characterization. "You're free to come and go as you please. This arrangement is a business transaction," she finished for him, turning back. "I'm aware, but we should be clear about what we've both signed up for. You've purchased a year of my life in exchange for career advancement, and I've agreed to play the role of devoted wife to secure my future. Let's not pretend it's anything more romantic than that." Her directness was refreshing, if slightly unsettling. Most women in her position would be dazzled by the penthouse, the lifestyle, the Pemberton name. Wanda saw it all clearly for what it was, a gilded business arrangement. "Fair enough," Sebastian acknowledged. "Since we're being direct, there is one more detail we should discuss. My mother has invited us to dinner tomorrow evening." Wanda's eyebrows rose. That was fast. News travels quickly in certain circles. She's curious about the woman who managed to secure a Pemberton ring in under a month. "And this is what you wanted, isn't it?" Wanda asked perceptively, to surprise her with a wife she never saw coming. Sebastian maintained his neutral expression, giving nothing away. "I want her to meet the brilliant woman I've married. The rest is incidental." "Is it?" Wanda's gaze was penetrating, as if she could see through the careful layers of his deception. "Well, I suppose we'll find out tomorrow what this is really about." The atmosphere at Pamela Pemberton's Upper East Side mansion the following evening was frigid in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Pamela stood in the grand foyer, elegant in a pale blue designer dress that emphasized her slender figure and perfectly coiffed silver blonde hair. Her smile was a masterpiece of social training, present but utterly devoid of warmth. "Sebastian, darling," she greeted, air-kissing his cheek. "What a surprise this has all been, Mother," Sebastian replied, his own smile equally practiced. "May I introduce my wife, Wanda Pemberton?" The slight emphasis on wife and Pemberton was deliberate. He watched with carefully concealed satisfaction as his mother's composure faltered for just a moment, a tightening around her eyes, the barely perceptible stiffening of her spine as she took in Wanda's appearance. Wanda stood beside him, stunning in a deep burgundy dress that was elegantly tasteful. She extended her hand with perfect poise. "Mrs. Pemberton, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." Pamela took Wanda's hand briefly, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Indeed, what an unexpected addition to our family. Please, come through to the sitting room." As they followed her through the mansion's opulent hallway, Sebastian placed his hand at the small of Wanda's back. The touch was meant to be supportive, a silent communication of solidarity before his mother's inevitable interrogation. Instead, he found himself acutely aware of the warmth of her body through the thin fabric of her dress, the subtle curve of her spine beneath his palm. Dinner was an exquisite exercise in passive aggression. Pamela deployed her most lethal weapon, overly polite curiosity wrapped in honeyed tones. "So Wanda," she began as the first course was served, "Sebastian tells me you work in the financial division of Pemberton Industries. How interesting that he found his bride within the company." "I was as surprised as anyone," Wanda replied smoothly. "But when the CEO takes an interest in your market analysis, it's difficult to say no to dinner." Sebastian suppressed a smile. Wanda was handling his mother with remarkable grace, neither intimidated nor overly defensive. "And your family," Pamela continued, delicately sipping her wine. "I don't believe Sebastian mentioned them. My mother raised my brother and me in Chicago," Wanda said. "She worked 3 jobs to ensure we could focus on our education." "How admirable," Pamela replied, her tone suggesting anything but admiration. "And your father?" "Mother," Sebastian interjected, recognizing the deliberate probe for vulnerabilities. "It's all right," Wanda said, placing her hand briefly on Sebastian's arm, a gesture that appeared affectionate to an observer but felt like a warning. "My father wasn't in the picture, but my mother made sure we didn't lack for love or guidance." "I see," Pamela said, cutting into her poached salmon with surgical precision. "And where was your schooling, dear?" Princeton for my undergraduate degree, Columbia for my MBA, Wanda replied. Both on full academic scholarship. Sebastian watched his mother's face, noting the flicker of surprise before she masked it. Pamela had expected someone less accomplished, someone easier to dismiss. Scholarship, Pamela repeated, as if the word itself was foreign. How? Was sourceful of you. The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, each of Pamela's questions designed to highlight the social and economic gulf between the Pemberton world and Wanda's background. Yet each time, Wanda responded with a composure that gradually seemed to unnerve his mother. By the time dessert was served, Sebastian could see the mask of civility slipping from Pamela's face. Her questions became more pointed, her veneer of politeness thinner. I must say, this has all happened with remarkable speed, she said, setting down her dessert fork with a delicate clink. One might almost think there was a pressing reason for such haste. The implication was clear. Sebastian felt a flash of genuine anger on Wanda's behalf. The only pressing reason was that I knew what I wanted, he replied coolly. Unlike some people, I don't need months of social vetting to recognize value. Clearly, Pamela said, her gaze sliding dismissively over Wanda. Though I wonder if the board will share your unique perspective on value. The board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholders, Sebastian reminded her. And as of last quarter, my personal holdings equal yours. The tension between them crackled. Years of power struggles distilled into this moment. Sebastian felt Wanda shift beside him, and then her hand found his under the table. The gesture surprised him. It was unnecessary for their audience, hidden as it was from view. Yet her warm fingers, intertwining with his, steadied him somehow. Perhaps we should address what's really happening here, Wanda said, her voice calm but direct. Mrs. Pemberton, you're disappointed in your son's choice of wife. That's your prerogative. But I am now a Pemberton. Whether that aligns with your expectations or not. We can continue this passive-aggressive dance indefinitely, or we can acknowledge the situation and find a way forward that respects everyone's position. A stunned silence followed her words. Sebastian fought to keep his expression neutral, though inwardly he was impressed. In all his years, he'd never seen anyone address his mother so directly. Pamela's face had gone completely still, her blue eyes cold as Arctic ice. Well, she said finally, at least you're direct. That's something, I suppose. The evening ended shortly thereafter, the goodbye as frigid as the welcome had been. As their car pulled away from the mansion, Sebastian couldn't contain his satisfaction any longer. That was perfect, he said, a genuine smile breaking through his usual composure. Did you see her face when you called out the passive aggression? I don't think anyone's ever spoken to her that way in her own home. Wanda looked at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. Is that what this is about, Sebastian? Using me to punish your mother? The question was too close to the truth. Sebastian's smile faded as he chose his words carefully. This is about showing her that I make my own choices, in business and in life. And I'm the choice guaranteed to upset her most, Wanda concluded. It wasn't a question. You're brilliant, accomplished, and utterly unimpressed by the Pemberton name, Sebastian replied, avoiding a direct answer. Yes, that challenges everything she values. But that's also why you're exactly what the company needs. Wanda held his gaze for a long moment before looking away. Just remember, I agreed to be your wife, not your weapon. The words hit uncomfortably close to Sebastian's unspoken intentions. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the victory of the evening suddenly feeling hollow. Back at the penthouse, Sebastian poured himself a scotch, while Wanda moved toward her suite. At the hallway, she paused. Your mother said something interesting when you stepped away to take that call, she said. She told me not to get comfortable, that Pemberton men have a history of discarding what doesn't serve their ambitions. Sebastian froze, the glass halfway to his lips. My mother excels at poisoning wells. Is she wrong? Wanda asked, turning to face him fully. Sebastian set down his glass and crossed the room until he stood before her. In her heels, she was nearly his height, her eyes level with his. I keep my agreements, Wanda, always. Whatever my mother implied, you have nothing to fear from me. She studied his face, searching for something, truth, perhaps, or deception. "Good night, Sebastian." As she turned away, Sebastian reached out, catching her arm gently. The contact sent that same disturbing current through him, and from the slight widening of her eyes, he knew she felt it too. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For tonight, you were remarkable." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her face, a softening that made her even more beautiful. Then her composure returned, and she gently extracted her arm from his grasp. "I'm just upholding my end of the contract," she replied. "Good night." Sebastian watched her disappear down the hallway, then returned to his abandoned scotch. The evening had gone exactly according to his plan. His mother was horrified, her control slipping. Yet instead of satisfaction, he felt a nagging discomfort as Wanda's words echoed in his mind. "I agreed to be your wife, not your weapon." Over the next few weeks, Sebastian and Wanda settled into an unexpected rhythm. They breakfasted together most mornings, discussing the day ahead, strategy for upcoming board meetings, the latest market movements. They arrived at Pemberton Tower separately, but often found themselves in the same meetings, where Wanda's insights continued to impress both Sebastian and the executive team. The facade of their marriage was maintained with careful attention to detail. Public lunches, where Sebastian would touch Wanda's hand across the table, lingering glances in crowded elevators, his hand at the small of her back as they entered rooms together. All choreographed performances for the benefit of watching eyes. Yet, increasingly, Sebastian found himself continuing these gestures even when no audience warranted them. Bringing Wanda coffee in her home office, prepared exactly as she liked it. Texting her during long meetings when she was presenting. Simple messages of encouragement. Small moments of connection that weren't part of their contract, but somehow felt necessary. One evening, Sebastian returned to the penthouse later than usual after a contentious meeting with European investors. He loosened his tie as he stepped from the elevator, expecting to find the common areas dark and quiet as they usually were when he worked late. Instead, he found Wanda on the balcony, silhouetted against the city lights. She wore silk pajama shorts and a thin tank top, her hair freed from its usual professional style to fall in natural curls around her shoulders. She didn't turn at his entrance, seemingly lost in thought as she gazed out at the Manhattan skyline. Sebastian paused, struck by how different she looked in this unguarded moment, softer, more vulnerable than the composed executive he saw each day. He cleared his throat gently to announce his presence. "You're home late," she said without turning. "European markets," he explained, setting down his briefcase and joining her at the railing. "Everything all right?" Wanda glanced at him, then back at the city below. "I had dinner with Trey tonight. He's still convinced I've lost my mind." "Your brother remains suspicious of my intentions," Sebastian observed. "Smart man." That earned him a small smile. "He thinks I'm being used." The statement hung in the air between them, uncomfortably close to the truth. Sebastian studied her profile in the dim light. "Were you having doubts about our arrangement?" "No," she replied after a moment. "I knew what I was signing up for, but sometimes, Wanda finally turned to face him fully. "Sometimes I wonder what you're not telling me." "Why me, Sebastian? There are dozens of women who would have served your purpose, whatever that really is. Why choose someone your mother would find so objectionable?" The question cut too close to his hidden motives. Sebastian deflected with a partial truth. "Because you're extraordinary, and because you're not afraid of her." "That's not the whole story." "No," he admitted, "but it's a significant part of it." They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming below them. Sebastian became acutely aware of their proximity, of the faint scent of her shampoo carried on the night breeze, of how the thin silk of her tank top revealed the curves beneath. "We have a charity gala tomorrow night," he said, forcing his thoughts back to practical matters. "The Children's Hospital benefit. My mother will be there with her entire social circle." Wanda nodded. "I've already selected a dress. Antonia helped me." Antonia was Pamela's oldest friend and the reigning queen of Manhattan society. The fact that she'd offered to help Wanda with her gala attire was telling and concerning. "Be careful with Antonia," Sebastian warned. "She's my mother's most loyal ally. Any assistance she offers comes with strings attached." "I'm aware," Wanda replied with a slight smile. That's why I accepted her help, but ultimately chose something completely different than what she suggested. Sebastian couldn't help but laugh. Clever. I've learned that the society games your mother plays require a certain strategic approach, Wanda said. Much like hostile takeover attempts. And you excel at neutralizing those, Sebastian reminded her. Thinking back to their first meeting in the boardroom, Wanda's expression softened slightly. It's late. I should get some sleep. As she moved to pass him, Sebastian found himself reaching for her arm, stopping her. The contact sent that now familiar current between them, a physical awareness that was becoming harder to ignore. Wanda, he said, his voice lower than he intended. Thank you for all of this. She looked down at where his hand rested on her bare arm, then back up to his face. Something shifted in her expression, a moment of vulnerability, quickly masked. Good night, Sebastian, she said quietly, gently extracting herself from his grasp. He watched her walk away, fighting an inexplicable urge to follow her, to continue their conversation, to understand the complexity he glimpsed beneath her composed exterior. Instead, he remained on the balcony, trying to ignore the lingering warmth of her skin against his palm. The Pemberton Children's Hospital Benefit was the social event of the season, bringing together New York's elite in a display of philanthropy that was equal parts charity and spectacle. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel gleamed with crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, and the reflected light of millions in jewelry adorning the city's wealthiest necks and wrists. Sebastian stood at the entrance, checking his watch impatiently. Wanda had insisted on getting ready separately, claiming some mysterious final touches required privacy. He'd honored her request, though the anticipation of seeing her was more acute than he cared to admit. Sebastian Pemberton, without a date, has hell frozen over. He turned to find Catherine Sterling approaching, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The woman his mother had selected as his suitable wife was objectively beautiful, tall, slender, with the polished blonde perfection that came from generations of careful breeding and expensive maintenance. Catherine, he greeted her with practiced charm. You look lovely as always. And you're being evasive as always, she replied with a knowing smile. I heard the most fascinating rumor. Something about you and a hasty marriage to some employee. Mother nearly had a connection when Antonia told her. Before Sebastian could respond, a ripple of attention swept through the entrance hall. Heads turned, conversations paused, and a path naturally cleared as Wanda entered. She wore a golden dress that seemed to capture and reflect the light in shimmering waves. The design was both elegant and daring, high-necked in front, but open in the back, revealing the smooth expanse of her skin from shoulders to waist. Her natural hair was styled in an intricate updo that emphasized her long neck and delicate features. But it wasn't just the dress that commanded attention. It was the way she carried herself. Chin high, shoulders back, her stride confident and unhurried. She moved through the crowd of society elites like a queen among courtiers, neither seeking their approval nor apologizing for her presence. Sebastian felt something unexpected tighten in his chest as she approached. Pride, certainly. She was stunning by any measure. But something else too. Something he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. I believe you were asking about my wife, he said to Catherine, whose perfect features had frozen in surprise. Catherine Sterling, meet Wanda Pemberton. Wanda extended her hand with gracious confidence. Miss Sterling, Sebastian has mentioned you. Catherine recovered quickly, social training taking over. Mrs. Pemberton, what a surprise. I don't believe we've crossed paths before. Wanda was our financial strategy director before we married, Sebastian explained, placing his hand at the small of Wanda's back. The contact with her bare skin sent a jolt through him that he carefully concealed. Though now she's joined the executive committee. How progressive, Catherine replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. If you'll excuse me, I see Mother waving for me. As Catherine retreated, Wanda turned to Sebastian with a raised eyebrow. That was your mother's choice for you? The perfect society bride, Sebastian confirmed, his hand still resting on the warm skin of her back. Impeccable bloodlines, flawless manners, and the personality of expensive wallpaper. Wanda laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby guests. "You're terrible." "But not wrong," he countered, guiding her further into the ballroom. "You, on the other hand, look—" Words failed him momentarily as he took in the full effect of her appearance. The gown seemed designed specifically to command attention, to make a statement that she belonged in this world of wealth and privilege while simultaneously rejecting its shallow values. "Acceptable?" she supplied when he didn't continue. "Extraordinary," he corrected softly. "Every eye in the room is on you." A faint flush colored her cheeks at the sincerity in his tone. "Well, that was the plan, wasn't it? To make a statement?" Sebastian nodded, though privately he acknowledged that his reaction had nothing to do with their strategic objectives. "Shall we make the rounds? My mother is by the champagne fountain, undoubtedly plotting our social demise." The evening progressed as Sebastian had anticipated. A carefully orchestrated dance of introductions, thinly veiled insults disguised as compliments, and the gradual shift in the room's atmosphere as Wanda refused to be intimidated by any of it. Pamela Pemberton held court near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by her most loyal sycophants. When Sebastian and Wanda approached, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sebastian, darling. And Wanda, how lovely to see you both." "Mother," Sebastian greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "The event seems to be a tremendous success." "Yes, well, we've already raised over $2 million for the Children's Cancer Ward," Pamela replied, her gaze sliding dismissively over Wanda. "Antonia was just telling me about your consultation regarding attire for tonight. I see you decided to go in a different direction." "Mrs. Crawford's suggestions were helpful," Wanda replied smoothly. "But ultimately, I felt this better represented the Pemberton name." The subtle emphasis on her claim to the Pemberton name wasn't lost on anyone in the circle. Sebastian watched his mother's composure slip for just a moment before she recovered. "Indeed," Pamela said coldly. "Speaking of representing our name, the board has expressed some concerns about recent changes in leadership structure." "Has it?" Sebastian responded, his tone equally cool. "Strange that as CEO, I haven't heard these concerns directly." "Perhaps they're being discreet," Pamela suggested. "After all, nepotism can be such a delicate subject." The implication was clear. Wanda's rapid elevation was being viewed as Sebastian's inappropriate favoritism toward his new wife. Before Sebastian could respond, Wanda spoke up. "Nepotism implies advancement without merit, Mrs. Pemberton," she said, her voice calm, but carrying enough to be heard by those nearby. "My qualifications and contributions speak for themselves, but if there are concerns, I'd be happy to present my complete strategy for Asian market expansion at the next board meeting. The projections show a 32% increase in profitability over the next fiscal year." The confident precision of her response left Pamela momentarily speechless. Sebastian felt a surge of satisfaction at his mother's discomfort, but it was overshadowed by genuine admiration for Wanda's poise. "That won't be necessary," Pamela finally said, her voice tight. "I'm sure the board will adjust to the new direction." The rest of the evening continued in similar fashion, veiled attacks met with graceful deflection. Sebastian watched as Wanda navigated the treacherous waters of Manhattan high society with remarkable skill, winning over even some of his mother's oldest allies with her intelligence and genuine charm. By midnight, however, the constant tension had taken its toll. Sebastian noticed Wanda's smile becoming more fixed, her posture slightly less relaxed. During a momentary lull when she was speaking with the hospital's chief of surgery, he approached and gently touched her elbow. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" he asked quietly. Gratitude flashed in her eyes as she nodded. "If you'll excuse me, doctor," she said to the surgeon, "I'll be sure to follow up about the pediatric research initiative." Sebastian led her through the French doors onto the terrace overlooking Central Park. The night air was cool after the warmth of the ballroom, and they found themselves alone in a secluded corner, the sounds of the gala muted behind them. "Thank you," Wanda said, taking a deep breath. Another minute of pretending Antonia Crawford's backhanded compliments were genuine, and I might have said something decidedly un-Pemberton-like. Sebastian smiled. "You've been magnificent. Far better than I could have hoped. Is that why you looked so pleased when your mother couldn't respond to my market expansion comment?" Wanda asked perceptively. Because I exceeded expectations in humiliating her? The question hit uncomfortably close to his true motivations. Sebastian turned to face the park, gathering his thoughts. My relationship with my mother is complicated. So I've gathered, Wanda replied dryly. What I haven't gathered is exactly where I fit into that complication. Before Sebastian could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, the terrace doors opened. Pamela Pemberton stepped out, accompanied by John Steele, the very man whose hostile takeover attempt Wanda had thwarted months ago. Pamela's eyes narrowed when she spotted them in the shadows. There you are, Sebastian. Mr. Steele was just sharing some fascinating insights about our Asian market strategy. Apparently, there are serious vulnerabilities our board hasn't been made aware of. Sebastian felt Wanda tense beside him. Is that so? He replied coolly. How convenient that our most aggressive competitor has suddenly become concerned with our well-being. John Steele smiled, all predatory charm. Not convenience, Pemberton. Opportunity. Your mother and I have been discussing a potential merger that would benefit both our companies. A merger, Sebastian repeated flatly. Interesting that the CEO hasn't been included in these discussions. Just preliminary conversations, Pamela said with a dismissive wave. Though the board seems quite receptive, especially given recent distractions in leadership. The implication was clear. Sebastian's marriage and Wanda's elevation were being positioned as detrimental to the company's interests. It was a direct attack, not just on their relationship, but on Sebastian's authority as CEO. Mr. Steele, Wanda said suddenly, her voice perfectly composed. I believe the last time we met, I demonstrated quite thoroughly why Apex Capital's analysis of our Asian market was fundamentally flawed. Has something changed in the interim, or are you still operating on the same mistaken assumptions? Steele's smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Pemberton, always a pleasure to face such spirited opposition. Perhaps your husband hasn't shared the complete financial picture with you. Or perhaps, Wanda countered, stepping forward, you're hoping the board won't remember that your company is over-leveraged by nearly 50% according to your latest SEC filings. A merger with Pemberton would certainly solve that problem for you, wouldn't it? Sebastian watched his mother's expression shift from smug certainty to concern as Wanda systematically dismantled Steele's position with precise, irrefutable facts. It was the same brilliant strategic mind he'd witnessed in that first boardroom, now defending not just the company, but him personally. I think we've had enough fresh air, Pamela finally interrupted, her voice brittle. John, shall we rejoin the party? I believe the auction is about to begin. As they retreated, Sebastian turned to Wanda with newfound appreciation. That was satisfying, she finished for him, a slight smile playing at her lips. Though probably not helpful for family harmony. Family harmony has never been a Pemberton strong suit, Sebastian replied, moving closer to her. In the moonlight, with the city spread out below them, she looked even more beautiful than she had in the ballroom. More real somehow, more herself. Your mother truly despises me, Wanda observed. But there was no hurt in her tone, only clinical assessment. It's not personal, Sebastian said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. She despises anything she can't control. Including you? The question was unexpectedly perceptive. Sebastian hesitated, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the intimacy of this conversation that went beyond their contractual relationship. Especially me, he admitted quietly. I'm the only one who ever challenges her. Wanda studied his face in the dim light. And that's why you married me, to challenge her. It wasn't a question this time, but a statement of understanding. Sebastian felt exposed, his carefully constructed rationale suddenly seeming transparent. Wanda, It's all right, she interrupted softly. I knew from the beginning this wasn't just about business advancement. You needed someone who would disrupt her world, who would stand against her without flinching. Someone she couldn't charm or intimidate or buy off. Sebastian was silent, unable to deny the truth of her assessment. What I don't understand, Wanda continued, is why it matters so much. What are you really fighting for, Sebastian? The question struck at the heart of something he rarely examined, the deeper motivations behind his endless war with his mother. Before he could formulate a response, the terrace doors opened again as guests began spilling out, laughing and chatting, the auction having concluded inside. The moment of vulnerability was broken. Sebastian offered his arm to Wanda, a return to their public performance. "We should go back in. The donation announcements will be starting soon." She accepted his arm, but her eyes told him she hadn't forgotten her unanswered question. As they rejoined the gala, Sebastian found himself unsettled by how easily she had seen through his facade, and by how much he wanted to tell her the truth she had so accurately glimpsed. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of social obligations and strategic appearances. They made their donation to the hospital, a sum large enough to elicit gasps and guarantee headlines, and circulated through the remaining guests with practiced charm. By the time they returned to the penthouse, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Wanda slipped off her heels in the elevator, a small gesture of relief that somehow made her seem more approachable, more human despite the elegant gown and perfect makeup. "You were remarkable tonight," Sebastian said as the elevator doors closed behind them. "Every person in that room underestimated you. Even me." Wanda smiled tiredly. High praise from a Pemberton. "I mean it," he insisted, following her into the living room. "The way you handled Steele and my mother, it was masterful." "I was just upholding my end of our arrangement," she replied, moving toward the bar to pour herself a glass of water. "Protecting the Pemberton name, as agreed." "It felt like more than that," Sebastian said quietly. Wanda paused, glass halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" Sebastian moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "When you defended the company, defended me against Steele, it seemed personal." She set down the glass, meeting his gaze directly. "Of course it was personal. Whatever our private arrangement, I won't stand by while your mother and that corporate shark try to undermine you publicly. That's not who I am." The simple honesty of her response touched something in Sebastian that had been dormant for years. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Wanda's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. "Sebastian," she whispered, her voice uncertain. "What are you doing?" He wasn't entirely sure himself. This wasn't part of their contract, wasn't part of his plan, yet in this moment, with the moonlight streaming through the windows and Wanda looking at him with those questioning eyes, the plan seemed suddenly irrelevant. "I don't know," he admitted, his thumb brushing lightly across her cheekbone. Whatever he might have said was lost as the penthouse phone rang shrilly, shattering the moment. Wanda stepped back, the connection broken as Sebastian moved to answer it. "Pemberton," he said curtly. It was his assistant, apologizing for the late hour but relaying an urgent message. A crisis with their Tokyo office requiring immediate attention. As Sebastian listened to the details, he watched Wanda retreat toward her bedroom, the moment between them lost. "I'll handle it," he told his assistant, hanging up. "Wanda," he called after her. She paused at the hallway, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You should take care of Tokyo," she said softly. "Good night, Sebastian." As she disappeared down the corridor, Sebastian stood alone in the living room, the ghost of her skin still warm against his palm. The phone call had broken the spell, but not before he'd glimpsed something dangerous, not just desire, which would have been manageable, but something deeper. Something that threatened the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart and a strategic plan that had brought Wanda into his life. Something that, if he weren't careful, might make him forget why he'd married her in the first place. The Tokyo crisis required Sebastian's immediate attention, pulling him into a whirlwind of emergency meetings and late-night calls. By the time he resolved the situation 3 days later, something had shifted between him and Wanda. The moment on the terrace, the almost touch in their penthouse, neither mentioned it, retreating instead to the safety of their business arrangement. Yet Sebastian found himself increasingly distracted by her presence. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the subtle changes in her voice when she was passionate about an idea, the curve of her neck as she bent over reports late at night in their shared living room. This wasn't part of the plan. Wanda was meant to be a strategic alliance, a calculated move in his ongoing war with his mother. Not this. Distraction that made his chest tighten when she smiled at him across conference tables. 2 weeks after the charity gala, Sebastian's executive assistant delivered the news he'd been waiting for. Pamela Pemberton had scheduled an emergency board meeting without informing him. The power play was exactly as he'd anticipated, his mother attempting to undermine his authority while he was supposedly distracted by his new marriage. "She's making her move," Sebastian told Wanda that evening as they reviewed documents in the penthouse. "The board meeting is tomorrow at 10. Wanda looked up from her tablet, her expression concerned. "Do you know what she's planning?" "Almost certainly a vote of no confidence, using the Tokyo situation as evidence of my distracted leadership," Sebastian replied, pacing the living room. "She's been laying the groundwork since our wedding, whispering doubts, suggesting my judgment has been compromised." "By me," Wanda concluded quietly. Sebastian stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Yes, but that was always part of the plan." "Your plan," she reminded him, setting down her tablet. "To provoke your mother into overreaching." "And it's working," Sebastian said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "She's becoming sloppy, making decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. The Tokyo crisis was unfortunate timing, but actually helps our position. I resolved it more efficiently than anyone expected." Wanda studied him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "And what happens tomorrow?" "We walk into that boardroom together, present a united front, and demonstrate that far from distracting me, our partnership has strengthened the company," Sebastian explained. "I've prepared a comprehensive report on the Tokyo resolution. And if you're willing, I'd like you to present your Asian market expansion strategy. Show them exactly what they'd be losing if they sided with my mother." "Of course," Wanda agreed without hesitation. "I'll be ready." Sebastian felt a surge of something that went beyond strategic satisfaction. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. "Thank you." "It's what you're paying me for," she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The reminder of their arrangement struck Sebastian more uncomfortably than it should have. "Wanda," he began, taking a step toward her. "About the other night." "We should focus on tomorrow," she interrupted, standing abruptly. "I'll need to review my presentation and make sure it's board ready." Before Sebastian could respond, she had gathered her materials and retreated to her room, leaving him alone with questions he hadn't meant to ask and feelings he hadn't planned to develop. The next morning, they arrived at Pemberton Tower separately, a tactical decision to avoid appearing too coordinated. Sebastian entered the boardroom precisely at 10, finding his mother already seated at the head of the table, a position that traditionally belonged to him as CEO. The message was clear, a challenge to his authority. "Mother," he greeted her coolly, taking his seat to her right. "I don't recall receiving notice of this meeting." "An oversight, I'm sure," Pamela replied with a thin smile. "We have urgent matters to discuss regarding recent disruptions to company operations." The remaining board members filed in, their expressions revealing the divisions Pamela had cultivated. Old allies of his father looked uncomfortable but resolved. Newer members appeared uncertain, waiting to see which way the power would shift before committing. Precisely at 10:05, Wanda entered. She wore a tailored white suit that stood out dramatically against her dark skin, her natural hair styled in a sleek, professional updo. Every eye in the room followed her as she took her seat directly across from Sebastian, her expression composed and confident. "Mrs. Pemberton," Pamela acknowledged, with barely concealed distaste. "While we appreciate your enthusiasm, this is a closed board meeting to discuss sensitive company matters. As head of Asian strategy and a member of the executive committee, I believe I'm precisely where I should be," Wanda replied evenly. "Unless the board has changed the attendance requirements without proper notification?" One of the older board members cleared his throat. "She's right, Pamela. Executive committee members are entitled to attend all strategic discussions." Pamela's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course. Let's proceed, shall we? The first item on our agenda is the Tokyo crisis and the questionable leadership decisions that exacerbated it." For the next 20 minutes, Sebastian listened as his mother systematically laid out her case against him. The Tokyo situation presented as evidence of his distraction. Selective financial reports highlighting temporary downturns in specific markets, concerns from unnamed major shareholders about the company's direction. It was exactly as he'd expected, a carefully orchestrated attempt to undermine confidence in his leadership. What he hadn't expected was the fierce protectiveness he felt watching Wanda absorb each attack, her expression betraying nothing but calm professionalism, despite the underlying implications about her role in his supposed failures. When Pamela finally concluded her presentation, a tense silence fell over the boardroom. Sebastian allowed it to stretch for several seconds before speaking. "Are you finished, Mother?" he asked quietly. "I believe I've covered the essential concerns," Pamela replied, her confidence unwavering. Sebastian nodded, then leaned forward. "Then allow me to address them, starting with Tokyo." For the next half hour, he methodically dismantled each of her accusations. The Tokyo crisis hadn't been exacerbated by his leadership, but resolved more quickly than similar situations under previous management. The selective financial reports, when placed in proper context, actually showed growth in key areas. The concerned shareholders were revealed to be primarily Pamela's old social connections, with minimal actual holdings. As he spoke, Sebastian watched the board members' expression shift from uncertainty to reassessment. He was winning them back, but he needed something more definitive to secure his position. "And now," he said, concluding his defense, "I'd like to address the future rather than the past. Wanda, would you please share your Asian market expansion strategy with the board?" Wanda rose smoothly, connecting her tablet to the presentation system. "Thank you, Sebastian. Board members, what I'm about to present is the culmination of 6 months of market analysis and strategic planning." What followed was nothing short of brilliant. Sebastian had reviewed her strategy before, but watching her present it to the board, confident, articulate, with complete command of the complex data, he felt a surge of admiration that went far beyond professional respect. She outlined a comprehensive approach to expanding their Asian presence, identifying untapped markets, strategic acquisition targets, and innovative service offerings that would position Pemberton Industries at the forefront of the region's explosive growth. The projected revenue increases were substantial, far exceeding even the most optimistic board expectations. By the time she concluded, the atmosphere in the boardroom had transformed. Even Pamela's most loyal supporters were visibly impressed, murmuring among themselves about the potential implications of the strategy. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," said Howard Jameson, the oldest board member and a longtime friend of Sebastian's father. "This is precisely the kind of forward-thinking Pemberton Industries needs. I, for one, am reassured about the company's direction under current leadership." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Sebastian watched his mother's face as she realized her gambit had failed. Her expression remained composed, but he knew her well enough to recognize the cold fury in her eyes. "Well," Pamela said, her voice tight, "it seems my concerns have been addressed, though I still believe certain recent developments warrant ongoing attention." "I'm sure the board appreciates your diligence, Mother," Sebastian replied smoothly. "Now, if there's no other business, I believe we can adjourn." The meeting broke up quickly, board members filing out with renewed confidence in Sebastian's leadership. Several stopped to congratulate Wanda on her presentation, including some of his mother's traditional allies. Only Pamela remained seated, her posture rigid as the room emptied. When they were alone, Sebastian, Wanda, and Pamela, the elder Pemberton, finally spoke. "A clever performance," she said coldly. "Both of you." "Not a performance, Mother," Sebastian replied. "Leadership, vision, the qualities you've always claimed to value in a Pemberton." Pamela's gaze shifted to Wanda, assessing her with new calculation. "You're more formidable than I anticipated, Mrs. Pemberton. I underestimated you." "A common mistake," Wanda replied evenly, "though not one I'd expect from someone with your reputation for strategic thinking." The barb landed precisely, causing Pamela's eyes to narrow. "This isn't over, Sebastian," she said, rising from her chair. "You've won today's battle, but not the war. Perhaps it's time to consider whether this war benefits anyone," Sebastian suggested, surprising himself with the sentiment. "The company is thriving. Isn't that what should matter?" Pamela gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled. "What matters is legacy, Sebastian, something I fear you've forgotten in your recent distractions. With that parting shot, she swept from the room, leaving Sebastian and Wanda alone in the sudden silence. "That went exactly as you planned," Wanda observed, turning to face him. "Your mother overreached. The board rallied behind you, and Pemberton Industries is stronger for it." Sebastian nodded, but found himself unexpectedly dissatisfied with the victory. "Yes. Then why don't you look more pleased?" It was a perceptive question, one Sebastian wasn't entirely sure how to answer. The triumph felt hollow somehow, overshadowed by his growing awareness of Wanda as more than just a strategic ally. "I am pleased," he said finally, moving to gather his materials. "Your presentation was brilliant. You've secured your position, regardless of what happens with our arrangement." Wanda studied him for a moment. "Is that what's bothering you? The thought that I might not need our arrangement anymore?" The question struck uncomfortably close to feelings Sebastian wasn't ready to examine. "Of course not. Our contract benefits us both, regardless of today's outcome." "Right," Wanda said quietly. "The contract." Something in her tone made Sebastian look up, catching a fleeting expression of disappointment. Before he could question it, her professional mask was back in place. "I should prepare for the executive committee meeting this afternoon," she said, collecting her tablet. "Will I see you at home tonight?" Home. The word hung between them, carrying implications neither had acknowledged. Not the penthouse, not the residence, but home. "Yes," Sebastian replied. "I have a dinner meeting, but I should be back by 9. Wanda nodded and moved toward the door. Sebastian watched her go, fighting an unfamiliar urge to call her back, to say something, though what exactly he wasn't sure. Instead, he remained silent, telling himself that everything was proceeding according to plan. His mother's power was weakening, the board was firmly behind him, and Wanda was proving to be the perfect strategic partner. So why did victory taste so hollow? Sebastian's dinner meeting with potential European investors ran later than expected. It was nearly 11 when his car pulled up to the penthouse building, fatigue settling into his bones after the long, tense day. The penthouse was mostly dark when he entered, just a single lamp illuminating the living room. Sebastian loosened his tie, expecting to find the space empty. Instead, he discovered Wanda asleep on the sofa, her tablet still open beside her, financial reports scattered across the coffee table. She must have been waiting up for him. The realization sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. Sebastian stood motionless for a moment, taking in the sight of her. In sleep, her face was softer, the sharp intelligence and composure that defined her professional persona giving way to something more vulnerable. She'd changed from her white suit into silk pajamas, her hair freed from its professional style. Sebastian moved quietly, intending to retrieve a blanket from the hall closet. As he turned, his foot caught the edge of the coffee table, sending a stack of reports sliding to the floor with a soft thud. Wanda stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Sebastian?" she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to wake you." She sat up, running a hand over her face. "What time is it?" "Just after 11. The investors were more demanding than I expected." Sebastian moved to sit on the opposite end of the sofa. "You didn't have to wait up. I wanted to hear how the meeting went," she replied, stifling a yawn. "And to celebrate our victory today, there's champagne in the fridge." Sebastian smiled. "At 11 at night? It's never too late for victory champagne," Wanda declared, standing and stretching in a way that momentarily distracted Sebastian. "Besides, we earned it. Your mother's face when the board sided with you was worth commemorating." Sebastian followed her to the kitchen, watching as she retrieved the bottle she'd apparently prepared hours earlier. There was something oddly domestic about the moment. Wanda moving confidently through their shared space, anticipating his return, planning a celebration. "You were brilliant today," he said as she handed him 2 flutes to hold while she worked the cork. "The board was completely won over by your strategy." "We were brilliant," she corrected, the champagne opening with a satisfying pop. "Your dismantling of her accusations was masterful. I almost felt sorry for her." Sebastian laughed. "No, you didn't." "You're right, I didn't," Wanda admitted with a grin as she poured the champagne. "That woman has been trying to sabotage me since the day we met. Today felt like justice. They carried their glasses back to the living room, settling onto the sofa more comfortably now. Wanda tucked her legs beneath her, angling her body toward Sebastian in a posture more relaxed than their usual careful distance. To outmaneuvering Pamela Pemberton, Sebastian said, raising his glass. And to partnerships that work, Wanda added, clinking her flute against his. The champagne was excellent, crisp and celebratory. Sebastian felt some of the day's tension begin to dissipate as they discussed the board meeting, the investors, the next steps in their strategy. There's something I've been wondering, Wanda said, after a comfortable lull in conversation. Why do you fight so hard against your mother? What started this war between you? The question caught Sebastian off guard. It was more personal than their usual discussions, venturing into territory he rarely explored even with himself. It's complicated, he hedged, taking another sip of champagne. We have time, Wanda replied simply. And champagne. Sebastian steadied her face in the soft lamplight, finding genuine curiosity rather than strategic calculation. Something about the late hour, the victory they'd shared, the champagne warming his blood. It all conspired to lower his usual defenses. My father built Pemberton Industries from nothing, he began slowly. He wasn't old money like my mother's family. He was brilliant, driven, but never quite accepted by her social circle. They tolerated him because of his success, but he was always the outsider. Wanda nodded, her eyes encouraging him to continue. When I was growing up, my mother was obsessed with ensuring I fit into her world. The right schools, the right friends, the right attitudes. My father wanted me to understand the business from the ground up. He'd take me to construction sites, factories, make me talk to the workers. Those were the only times I felt real. Sebastian paused, surprised by how easily the memories were flowing after years of keeping them locked away. When I was 16, my father wanted to diversify into tech. He saw the future before most of his contemporaries. My mother fought him, insisted we stay with traditional industries that her family understood. They fought constantly about it. Sebastian's voice hardened. When he died suddenly of a heart attack at 50, she used her family connections to take control of the board. Her first act was to shut down all his tech initiatives. And you never forgave her, Wanda observed softly. It wasn't just about the business decisions, Sebastian admitted. It was what they represented. She erased him, his vision, his legacy. Everything that made Pemberton Industries truly his creation, she systematically dismantled, in favor of safe, traditional approaches that pleased her society friends on the board. He fell silent. The old anger and grief, surprisingly fresh, despite the years that had passed. So this fight with her, it's about more than control, Wanda said, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's about honoring your father's legacy. Yes, Sebastian acknowledged, meeting her gaze directly, and that's why I needed someone like you, not just to provoke her, but because you represent everything my father valued. Brilliance, drive, innovation, not family connections or social standing. The admission hung between them, more honest than Sebastian had intended to be. Wanda's expression softened, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight as she processed his words. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. It helps me understand why this matters so much to you. Sebastian nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with his own vulnerability. He stood, needing movement to dispel the intimate atmosphere that had developed between them. It's late, he said, collecting their empty glasses. We both have early meetings tomorrow. Wanda rose as well, but instead of heading toward her room, she moved to stand before him. Without her heels, the top of her head barely reached his chin, making her seem smaller, more approachable. Sebastian, she said quietly, I'm proud of what we accomplished today, and I'm honored to be part of your father's legacy, even if it started as a business arrangement. Something in her sincere tone broke through Sebastian's carefully constructed walls. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand cupping her cheek just as it had the night of the gala. This time, there was no phone call to interrupt them, no crisis to provide an escape. Wanda's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch, her lips parting slightly in silent question. It was all the invitation Sebastian needed. He lowered his head, closing the distance between them until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, an exploration rather than a demand. But when Wanda's arms slid around his neck, her body pressing closer to his, restraint shattered. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate, as if they were both finally acknowledging a current that had been building between them for weeks. Sebastian's hands moved to her waist, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin silk of her pajamas. Wanda made a soft sound against his mouth that sent heat coursing through him, dissolving all thoughts of business arrangements and strategic alliances. This was want, pure and simple, desire unconnected to any plan. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to completely break the connection between them. "This isn't in our contract," Wanda whispered, her voice unsteady. "No," Sebastian agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "It isn't." "Then what is it?" she asked, her eyes searching his. It was a question Sebastian wasn't prepared to answer. Not fully, not yet. Instead of words, he responded with another kiss, deeper than the first, pouring into it all the confusion and want and unexpected feeling that had been building since she'd first challenged John Steele in that boardroom. Wanda responded with equal fervor, her fingers threading through his hair, her body fitting perfectly against his. When Sebastian's hands slipped beneath the hem of her silk top, finding the warm skin of her back, she shivered against him. "Wanda," he murmured against her lips. A question and a plea rolled into her name. She answered by taking his hand and slowly leading him toward her bedroom, the room that had remained her private sanctuary since they'd begun their arrangement. As they crossed the threshold, Sebastian felt as if they were crossing a more significant boundary as well, moving from a calculated business partnership to something neither of them had anticipated. The bedroom was softly lit by a bedside lamp, casting golden shadows across the space that was uniquely Wanda's. Unlike the impersonal guest suite it had once been, the room now held touches of her personality. Books stacked on the nightstand, a framed photo of her with her brother, a soft throw blanket in rich red across the foot of the bed. Sebastian had never been in this space before. It felt intimate in a way that went beyond the physical desire pulsing between them. This was Wanda inviting him into the private world she'd created within their shared arrangement. She turned to face him, her expression open yet uncertain. "Are you sure about this?" The question caught him off guard. He'd expected to be the one asking for reassurance, not providing it. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Wanda reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers steady as she slowly undid each one. When she pushed the fabric from his shoulders, her hands splayed across his chest. Sebastian felt more exposed than the simple act warranted, as if she were reaching past his skin to something deeper. What followed was a gradual discovery of bodies, yes, but something more profound as well. Each touch revealed not just physical response, but unexpected vulnerability. When Sebastian's lips traced the curve of Wanda's neck, she whispered his name in a way that sounded nothing like their professional interactions. When her hands mapped the contours of his body, there was a reverence that transcended mere desire. Clothing fell away as barriers between them dissolved. In the soft lamplight, Sebastian took his time exploring every inch of her, the elegant curve of her collarbone, the soft swell of her breasts, the smooth expanse of her stomach. Wanda matched his deliberation, her touch both confident and tender, as she learned what made him gasp, what made him tremble. There was none of the awkwardness that often accompanied first intimacy. Instead, they moved together with an intuitive understanding, as if their bodies recognized something their minds were still processing. When Sebastian finally entered her, Wanda's legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him deeper. The sensation was overwhelming, not just physically, but emotionally as well. They established a rhythm that built slowly, intensity gathering with each movement. Sebastian watched Wanda's face as pleasure overtook her, her eyes half closed, lips parted, completely unguarded in a way he'd never seen before. The sight pushed him closer to his own edge. "Sebastian," she gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders as she approached her peak. "Please." He understood without further words, his movements becoming more focused, more deliberate, bringing her to the brink and then over. Her release triggered his own, a cascade of sensation that left him shuddering in her arms, her name a reverent whisper on his lips. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the cool sheets a contrast to their heated skin. Wanda's head rested on Sebastian's chest, her breathing gradually slowing to normal. His fingers traced idle patterns along her spine, unwilling to break contact even now. That wasn't part of the plan, Wanda murmured against his skin, a hint of humor in her voice. Sebastian chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. No, definitely not in the contract. She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. Do you regret it? The question was direct, like everything about Wanda. Sebastian considered it honestly, searching for any trace of the strategic calculation that had defined their relationship until now. He found none, only a surprising certainty. No, he said simply. Do you? Instead of answering immediately, Wanda leaned down and kissed him softly, a gesture more intimate than their passionate encounter had been. When she pulled back, her eyes were serious. It complicates things, she observed. Yes, Sebastian agreed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But I'm beginning to think complexity isn't always a bad thing. Wanda smiled, settling back against his chest. For a strategic mastermind, you're surprisingly philosophical after sex. The teasing comment made Sebastian laugh, the tension of the moment breaking. They fell into comfortable silence, the weight of what had changed between them present, but not oppressive. Sebastian found himself contemplating how completely his plan had veered off course. Wanda had been meant to be a weapon against his mother, a strategic alliance to secure his control of the company. Now, holding her in his arms, feeling her heartbeat against his skin, he recognized that she had become something far more dangerous, someone he genuinely cared for. The realization should have alarmed him. Instead, as sleep began to claim him, Sebastian felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Whatever complications tomorrow might bring, this moment felt right in a way few things in his calculated life ever had. Sebastian, Wanda's voice was soft, edged with approaching sleep. Whatever happens next, with your mother, the company, us, I'm glad we found each other, even if it started as a business arrangement. The simple honesty of her statement touched something deep within him. Sebastian tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. So am I, he whispered, surprised by how completely he meant it. The international business trip came at a convenient time. 3 days after their first night together, Sebastian was scheduled to fly to Singapore to finalize the deals that would implement Wanda's Asian market strategy. The timing provided an opportunity to create some distance, to think clearly about what was happening between them, without the distraction of her constant proximity. At least, that had been his intention. Instead, Sebastian found himself thinking about Wanda constantly. During meetings with Singaporean executives, his mind would drift to the way she'd looked in the morning light, sleep-tousled and soft beside him in bed, while reviewing contracts. He'd remember how she'd challenged his assumptions about the Malaysian market expansion, her intelligence as arousing as her physical beauty. The 3 nights they'd spent together before his departure had shifted something fundamental between them. Intimacy had broken down barriers that their business arrangement had carefully maintained. Now, standing in his hotel suite overlooking Singapore's glittering skyline, Sebastian realized that what had begun as strategic convenience had evolved into something he'd never anticipated: genuine connection. His phone chimed with an incoming message. Wanda, how did the meeting with Minister Chen go? Sebastian smiled, typing his response. Better than expected. Your cultural briefing was spot on. He was impressed that I knew about his daughter's university graduation. 3 dots appeared as she composed her reply. Told you, personal connections matter more than financial projections in Singapore. When's your meeting with Lim Holdings? Tomorrow morning. Then dinner with their executive team. A longer pause before her next message appeared. I miss you. 3 simple words that shouldn't have affected him so strongly. Sebastian stared at the screen, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. This wasn't part of their performance. No one would see these private messages. This was Wanda being honest about feelings that mirrored his own. I miss you too, he typed back, surprised by how easily the admission came. 2 more days. The penthouse is too quiet without you, she replied. Though I've taken over the living room for work, so prepare yourself for spreadsheets everywhere when you return." Sebastian smiled, imagining her curled up on their sofa, surrounded by reports and her ever-present tablet. It was a domestic image that would have seemed foreign to him a few months ago, but now filled him with unexpected longing. His phone rang, interrupting their exchange. The screen displayed his mother's name. Sebastian hesitated, then accepted the call. "Mother," he greeted her, his tone cooling instinctively. "It's late in New York." "Important matters don't keep business hours, Sebastian," Pamela replied. "I wanted to discuss the Singapore negotiations before your meeting with Lim tomorrow." Sebastian moved to the window, looking out at the city below. The negotiations are proceeding exactly as planned. Minister Chen has given his provisional approval for the merger. "Yes, I've seen the preliminary reports," Pamela said, her voice betraying irritation that he'd succeeded where she'd expected failure. "That's not why I'm calling." "Then why are you calling?" A slight pause. "I've been contacted by someone with concerning information about your wife." Sebastian's grip tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about?" "It seems Mrs. Pemberton may not be the straightforward success story she presents," Pamela continued, satisfaction evident in her tone. "There are inconsistencies in her background that raise serious questions about her suitability for her position, both professionally and personally." "Be specific, Mother," Sebastian demanded, tension radiating through him. "I'd rather not discuss details over the phone," Pamela replied smoothly. "But I thought you should know that I've scheduled a private board meeting for next Tuesday to address these concerns. As your mother, I felt you deserved warning before things become public." The implied threat was clear. Whatever information or misinformation his mother had assembled, she intended to use it to undermine Wanda. "If you have accusations to make them to me now," Sebastian said, his voice hardening. "Otherwise, I'll assume this is just another attempt to interfere in my life and my company." "Your company?" Pamela laughed softly. "Oh, Sebastian, when will you learn? Pemberton Industries has never been just yours. It's a legacy that stretches back generations, one that requires certain standards be maintained." "Standards like prejudice and outdated thinking?" Sebastian countered. "Father would be ashamed of what you've done to his vision." The mention of his father hit its mark. Pamela's voice chilled further. "Don't presume to tell me what your father would think. I knew him better than anyone, yet you've spent 15 years dismantling everything he built," Sebastian replied. "Whatever game you're playing with these so-called inconsistencies about Wanda, I suggest you reconsider. The board has already made their position clear." "We'll see," Pamela said cryptically. "Enjoy Singapore, darling. I look forward to your return." The call ended, leaving Sebastian staring at his phone, anger and concern warring within him. What exactly was his mother planning? What inconsistencies had she supposedly discovered about Wanda? Before he could analyze further, his phone chimed with another message from Wanda. "Everything okay?" "You went quiet." Sebastian hesitated, uncertain whether to share his mother's implied threat. Finally, he typed, "Just a call from Mother. The usual power plays. Nothing important." The lie felt wrong even as he sent it, but Sebastian justified it as protection. Until he knew what his mother was planning, alarming Wanda served no purpose. He would handle Pamela as he always had, through strategy and careful counterplay. Yet as he prepared for bed that night, Sebastian couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. For the first time, his mother's machinations against his wife felt personal, in a way that went beyond business strategy. The thought of Pamela trying to hurt Wanda, not just professionally, but personally, filled him with a protective rage he'd never experienced before. Because somewhere between contract signing and Singapore, between strategic alliance and shared bed, Wanda had become more than a calculated choice. She'd become someone he cared about, deeply, genuinely, in a way that had nothing to do with his war against his mother. And that realization was the most dangerous development of all. The remainder of the Singapore trip passed in a blur of meetings, negotiations, and growing concern about his mother's veiled threats. By the time Sebastian's plane touched down in New York, he was exhausted but determined. Whatever Pamela was planning, he would be prepared. Wanda was waiting for him at the penthouse, her welcoming smile making something tight in his chest finally loosen. She wore simple jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, casual in a way she rarely allowed herself to be in public. "Welcome home," she said, stepping into his embrace without hesitation. Sebastian held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. "It's good to be back." They moved easily into domestic routine. Wanda had ordered dinner from his favorite restaurant, and they ate at the kitchen island, discussing the Singapore deals, the implementation timeline, the reactions from various executives. It was comfortable, natural, in a way that belied the calculated beginning of their relationship. Yet beneath Sebastian's engagement in their conversation ran an undercurrent of worry. His mother's threat loomed, unnamed and unaddressed between them. "You seem distracted," Wanda observed as they finished dinner. "Is it jet lag or something else?" Sebastian considered deflecting again, but found he couldn't maintain the deception. "My mother called while I was in Singapore. She implied she has some kind of information about you, something she intends to present to the board on Tuesday." Wanda's expression shifted from relaxed to alert. "What kind of information?" "She wouldn't say specifically," Sebastian admitted. "Just that there are inconsistencies in your background that raise questions about your suitability." He watched carefully for any reaction that might suggest concern, but Wanda merely looked thoughtful. "Interesting timing," she observed. "Right after the Asian strategy is approved and implementation begins, a strategy I designed." "My thoughts exactly," Sebastian agreed. "It's almost certainly another attempt to undermine us." But he hesitated, unsure how to frame his question without sounding accusatory. "But you're wondering if there's anything in my past she could use against me." Wanda finished for him, her perceptiveness as sharp as ever. Sebastian nodded, relieved she'd understood without offense. "Not because I doubt you, but because I know my mother. She's ruthless when she feels threatened." Wanda was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, carrying their plates to the sink with deliberate movements. "My life hasn't been as privileged as yours, Sebastian," she said finally, her back still to him. "There are parts of my past that aren't in my corporate biography, things I'm not proud of, things I've had to overcome." Sebastian moved to stand behind her, not touching but close enough to offer support. "We all have those, Wanda." She turned to face him, her eyes serious. "My mother didn't just work 3 jobs when I was growing up. For a while, she was also addicted to prescription painkillers after a work injury. There was a period when Trey and I were briefly in foster care while she went through recovery." The admission clearly wasn't easy for her. Sebastian kept his expression neutral, encouraging her to continue. "I've never hidden it, but I don't advertise it either," Wanda continued. "It's not relevant to my professional qualifications. But if your mother has been digging, she could use it to paint a picture that suits her narrative," Sebastian finished, anger building at the thought of his mother weaponizing Wanda's difficult past. "There's more," Wanda said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. "To pay for extras in college, books, a laptop, professional clothes for interviews. I worked as a hostess at a gentleman's club. Nothing illegal, nothing I'm ashamed of, but not something I highlight on my resume." Sebastian processed this information, understanding the courage it took for her to share these details. "Is there anything else my mother might have found?" Wanda considered for a moment, then shook her head. "Nothing substantial. My academic record is exactly as presented. My professional history is documented and verifiable. But those personal details, in the right hands, twisted the right way, could be used to question your character," Sebastian concluded, his jaw tightening. "This is exactly my mother's playbook. Find something personal, something human, and use it to destroy someone professionally." "What do we do?" Wanda asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in this personal moment. Sebastian reached for her hands, holding them firmly in his. "We get ahead of it. Whatever narrative she's planning to spin, we control it first. Your background, the challenges you've overcome, they're not weaknesses, Wanda. They're evidence of your strength, your determination. Exactly the qualities my father valued. Exactly what Pemberton Industries needs. Something in Wanda's expression shifted at his words. A softening, a vulnerability that made Sebastian's chest tighten. She stepped closer, her hand still in his. "When I agreed to this arrangement," she said quietly, "I thought I understood exactly what I was getting into. A business transaction, a strategic alliance. I never expected—" "Neither did I," Sebastian admitted, drawing her closer. "But here we are." Their kiss was different from the passionate encounters that had preceded it. Gentler, more deliberate, layered with an understanding that transcended physical desire. When they finally broke apart, Wanda rested her head against Sebastian's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "Whatever my mother throws at us," Sebastian promised, "we'll face it together." The words felt right, true in a way that went beyond strategy or calculation. Whatever had begun as a business arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. A partnership built on genuine respect, growing affection, and unexpected trust. As they stood in the kitchen of the home they now truly shared, Sebastian realized that his perfect plan had indeed veered wildly off course. But for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he welcomed the deviation. And the woman who had caused it. Tuesday arrived with a sense of foreboding. Sebastian and Wanda had spent the weekend strategizing, preparing for whatever accusations Pamela might level at the board meeting. They decided on a proactive approach. Wanda would address her background directly, reframing potential vulnerabilities as evidence of her resilience and determination. The morning of the meeting, they dressed with particular care. Sebastian in his sharpest suit, Wanda in a tailored burgundy dress that projected both confidence and professionalism. As they stood side by side in the penthouse elevator, Sebastian reached for her hand. "Ready?" he asked, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. Wanda nodded, her expression composed, though tension radiated from her posture. "As ready as I'll ever be to have my personal history dissected by your mother." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the private garage where Sebastian's driver waited. The ride to Pemberton Tower passed in focused silence, each of them mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. When they arrived at the boardroom floor, Sebastian was surprised to find not just the board assembled, but John Steele of Apex Capital seated beside his mother at the head of the table. The presence of their chief competitor at a private board meeting was unprecedented and deeply concerning. "Sebastian," Pamela greeted him with a cold smile. "And, Mrs. Pemberton, how thoughtful of you both to join us." "Mother," Sebastian replied, his tone equally frigid. "I wasn't aware Apex Capital had voting rights at our board meetings now." "Mr. Steele is here at my invitation," Pamela said smoothly. "He has information relevant to today's discussion." Sebastian guided Wanda to seats opposite his mother, his hand at the small of her back, in a gesture that was both supportive and possessive. The other board members looked uncomfortable, clearly uncertain about the unusual proceedings. "Before we begin," Sebastian said, addressing the room rather than just his mother, "I'd like to understand the purpose of this meeting and why our primary competitor has been invited to participate." Howard Jameson, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "I share Sebastian's concerns. This is highly irregular, Pamela." "All will become clear shortly," Pamela assured them, her confidence unsettling. "But first, let's establish some context." She pressed a button, and the room's screens illuminated with financial charts. "These are the latest projections for our Asian market expansion, based on the strategy presented by Mrs. Pemberton and approved by this board." The charts showed impressive growth trajectories, exactly what they'd expected from Wanda's strategy. "Very impressive," Pamela continued, her tone suggesting the opposite, a strategy that would position Pemberton Industries as the dominant player in Southeast Asian financial services within 5 years. A strategy that coincidentally mirrors one developed by Apex Capital 3 years ago, but never implemented due to regulatory concerns. Murmurs ran through the board members as the implication became clear. Wanda sat perfectly still beside Sebastian, her expression revealing nothing. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mother?" Sebastian demanded. Pamela's smile was shark-like. "I'm not suggesting anything, darling. I'm stating facts. Mr. Steele, perhaps you'd care to elaborate." John Steele leaned forward, his expression a practiced mask of regretful concern. 3 years ago, Apex Capital developed a comprehensive strategy for Asian market expansion. The initiative was shelved after preliminary regulatory consultation, but the framework remained in our secure servers. Until 6 months ago, when we experienced what we believed was a routine security breach. And you're implying Wanda was responsible? Sebastian asked incredulously. Based on what evidence? Based on this, Pamela interjected, changing the screen to display a series of emails. Communications between Mrs. Pemberton and a known corporate security specialist, discussing methods for accessing protected corporate data. These were provided by an anonymous source concerned about potential industrial espionage. Sebastian glanced at the emails displayed on screen. They appeared to show correspondence between Wanda and someone named Marcus Chen, discussing secure access methods and extraction protocols. Without context, they looked damning. Before Sebastian could respond, Wanda spoke for the first time since entering the room. "May I see the full email chain, please?" she asked, her voice steady despite the serious accusations being leveled against her. "Of course," Pamela replied, with false graciousness, sending the files to Wanda's tablet. Wanda reviewed them quickly, her expression shifting from concern to something like relief. "As I suspected," she said, looking up at the board. "These emails have been selectively edited and presented without context." She tapped on her tablet, sending a new set of files to the main screen. "These are the complete communications between myself and Marcus Chen, who is indeed a security specialist, one hired by Pemberton Industries last year to test our own system vulnerabilities, after the Hadley tech breach affected several of our competitors." The full emails clearly showed this context, with references to Pemberton's internal security protocols and authorized penetration testing. The phrases that had seemed incriminating in isolation were revealed as standard cybersecurity terminology. Furthermore, Wanda continued, her confidence growing as she took control of the narrative. "The Asian strategy I developed was built on public market analysis, regulatory filings, and economic projections available to any financial strategist. If there are similarities to Apex's shelved plan, it's because we're analyzing the same data and market conditions." John Steele's expression had soured as Wanda systematically dismantled the accusation. Pamela, however, remained unnervingly composed. "A convenient explanation," she said dismissively, "but it doesn't address the more concerning issues about Mrs. Pemberton's background and character." Here it was, the personal attack they'd been anticipating. Sebastian tensed, preparing to defend Wanda, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm, silently indicating she would handle this herself. "My background?" Wanda asked, her tone deliberately even. "You mean my mother's addiction issues when I was a child, or perhaps my job as a hostess while putting myself through college? I'm curious which part of overcoming adversity you find most objectionable, Mrs. Pemberton." A ripple of surprise ran through the board members. Pamela's eyes narrowed, clearly thrown by Wanda's direct approach. "I've never hidden my past," Wanda continued, addressing the entire board now. "I grew up in public housing. My mother worked multiple jobs and struggled with addiction after a workplace injury. My brother and I spent time in foster care. I worked whatever jobs I could find to put myself through school. These aren't secrets. They're the experiences that shaped me into the person and professional I am today." Her quiet dignity was powerful. Several board members were nodding, clearly impressed by her forthrightness. "What concerns me," Wanda concluded, "is not that these facts about my past have been discovered, but that they're being weaponized in an attempt to discredit me professionally. I believe the members of this board are sophisticated enough to distinguish between personal challenges overcome and professional qualifications. My work speaks for itself. My strategy is sound, as your own financial projections confirm." Howard Jameson cleared his throat. "I must say, Mrs. Pemberton, I find your candor refreshing. Many of us on this board come from privileged backgrounds and have never faced such challenges. Your resilience is commendable." Several other board members murmured agreement. Sebastian watched his mother's face tighten as she realized her attack was backfiring. But Pamela Pemberton wasn't one to surrender easily. "Candor is indeed admirable," she said smoothly. "Which brings me to the final matter I wanted to discuss today. She turned to Sebastian, her blue eyes cold. Perhaps you'd like to share with the board the real reason for your hasty marriage. The strategic calculations behind your choice of wife. The question hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He felt Wanda stiffen beside him, her hand withdrawing from his arm. In that moment, he knew his mother had discovered the truth, or enough of it to be dangerous. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mother," he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "No?" Pamela's smile was vicious. "Then perhaps these will refresh your memory." The screen changed again, now displaying a document Sebastian recognized with sickening clarity, his private notes from the night he decided to pursue Wanda. The candidate assessment he'd created, evaluating her suitability not as a partner, but as a weapon against his mother. Candidate assessment. Background. Working class. Public housing. Mother will be horrified. Education. Elite but scholarship. No family connections. Appearance. Beautiful. Black. Maximum social disruption. Temperament. Fearless, direct, will stand up to mother. Professional value. Brilliant strategist, useful for business. The words seemed to hang in the air, stark and damning. Sebastian couldn't bring himself to look at Wanda, couldn't bear to see the hurt and betrayal that must be crossing her face. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, fury barely contained in his voice. "Your personal server isn't as secure as you believe," Pamela replied. "But the source is irrelevant. What matters is the content. You didn't marry Mrs. Reeves because you valued her as a person, or even primarily for her professional capabilities. You selected her, specifically to antagonize me, because of her race, her background. Everything you knew would horrify me." The boardroom had gone deathly silent. Sebastian felt the weight of every gaze, but none heavier than Wanda's, who sat perfectly still beside him. "Is this true, Sebastian?" Howard Jameson asked quietly. Before Sebastian could respond, Wanda stood, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the tension radiating from her. "I need to address something," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "When Sebastian and I married, we both understood it was a strategic alliance. I entered into it with open eyes, aware that there were professional advantages for both of us." She paused, taking a breath that seemed to center her. "What I didn't know," she continued, "was that I was specifically selected as a weapon in a family war. That my race, my background, things I have never been anything but proud of, were calculated variables in a plan to hurt someone else." Her composure was devastating in its dignity. Sebastian wanted to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. "I believe this meeting has revealed all it needs to," Wanda concluded. "The accusations against me professionally have been addressed and disproven. The personal revelations." She glanced briefly at Sebastian, her eyes unreadable. "Those will require a different kind of resolution." With that, she gathered her tablet and walked out of the boardroom, her head high, her steps measured. The door closed softly behind her, the quiet click, somehow more damning than any dramatic exit could have been. The silence that followed was excruciating. Sebastian stood, unable to remain in that room a moment longer. "This meeting is adjourned," he said, not caring if he had the authority to make such a declaration. "Sebastian," his mother called as he reached the door. "You understand, this changes everything. The board can't possibly—" "Enough," Sebastian cut her off, turning to face her with cold fury. "You've won, Mother. Isn't that what you wanted? But understand this. What you've done today wasn't business. It was cruelty, pure and simple. I was protecting our family legacy," Pamela insisted. "That woman was never suitable." "That woman," Sebastian interrupted, "has more integrity, more brilliance, and more genuine class than you could hope to understand. And I've lost her because I was too caught up in fighting you to realize what was right in front of me." Without waiting for a response, Sebastian left the boardroom, his only thought finding Wanda. The executive floor was a blur as he searched conference rooms, her office, the elevator lobby. Finally, her assistant informed him that Mrs. Pemberton had left the building immediately after the meeting. Sebastian tried calling her cell, but the call went straight to voicemail. He sent text messages that remained unread. As a last resort, he had his driver rush him back to the penthouse, praying she'd gone home. The penthouse was eerily quiet when he entered. "Wanda?" he called, moving quickly through the living room toward her bedroom. The door was open. Inside, drawers had been pulled out, the closet door ajar. Essential items were missing, enough to tell him she'd packed quickly but thoroughly. On the bed lay a single envelope, with his name written in her elegant handwriting. Sebastian's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "Sebastian, I understand now why you chose me. I was the perfect candidate to disrupt your mother's world and help you win your war. A black woman, from public housing with no family connections. I couldn't have been more ideally unsuitable in her eyes if you'd designed me in a laboratory. What hurts most isn't that our marriage began as a business arrangement. We were both clear about that from the beginning. It's that you selected me specifically for qualities you knew would hurt someone else. My race, my background, my life experiences, all weaponized in a family conflict I never fully understood. I wonder if you ever saw me as a person, rather than a strategic asset. Did you ever consider how it would feel to discover you were chosen not for yourself, but for how effectively you could be used to wound someone else? I need time and space to process this betrayal. Please don't try to contact me. I'll reach out if I'm ready to talk. Wanda." Sebastian sank onto the edge of the bed, the letter clutched in his hand, a hollow ache spreading through his chest. The full magnitude of what he'd done, of what he'd lost, crashed over him in waves of regret. How had he not seen that his perfect plan would inevitably lead here, that using someone as a weapon would ultimately hurt them more than his intended target? And when had Wanda transformed from a strategic choice into the woman he couldn't imagine his life without? The penthouse felt cavernous in its emptiness, the silence oppressive where once it had been filled with Wanda's presence. Her laughter over morning coffee, her focused concentration as she worked late into the night, her warmth beside him in bed. Sebastian wasn't sure how long he sat there, the letter in his hand, grief and regret his only companions. Eventually his phone buzzed with messages from the office, urgent matters requiring the CEO's attention. Board members requesting meetings to discuss the morning's revelations, the company, his position, the power he'd fought so hard to secure. It all seemed hollow now, meaningless without the woman who had unexpectedly become the center of his world. Sebastian placed the letter carefully on the nightstand and pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, decisions that couldn't wait. But they weren't the ones his assistant was frantically texting about. First, he called Remy Gibson, his oldest friend and the only person he trusted completely. "I need your help," Sebastian said when Remy answered. "And I need you not to ask questions right now." "What's happened?" Remy asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'll explain everything later," Sebastian promised. "But first, I need you to come to the penthouse and help me figure out where Wanda might have gone." After hanging up with Remy, Sebastian made a second call to his lawyer. What he was planning would change everything, would undo years of careful positioning and strategic maneuvering. But for the first time in his adult life, Sebastian Pemberton was making a decision based not on calculation, but on what truly mattered. 3 days passed, with no word from Wanda. Sebastian tried every avenue he could think of to find her, calling her brother Trey, who hung up on him after a scathing assessment of his character, checking hotels, reaching out to mutual acquaintances. She had vanished as completely as she'd entered his life, leaving only the echo of her absence in the spaces they'd shared. Meanwhile, the corporate fallout from the board meeting was intense. News of the confrontation had spread throughout Pemberton Industries, with rumors flying about what had transpired. Sebastian had returned to work the day after, facing the whispers and stares with stoic determination. His mother had wasted no time capitalizing on the situation, calling for an emergency shareholders meeting to address the leadership crisis. The date was set for the following Monday, giving Sebastian less than a week to either find Wanda and make things right, or face the consequences of his actions alone. On the 4th day after Wanda's departure, Sebastian received a text from an unknown number. "She's staying with me. She doesn't want to see you. Stop looking. Trey Reeves." The message was hardly encouraging, but it provided something Sebastian desperately needed: confirmation that Wanda was safe, and a potential point of contact. He immediately called Remy. "I know where she is," Sebastian said without preamble. "She's staying with her brother." "That's good news," Remy replied cautiously. "Are you going over there?" "No," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the restraint. "She doesn't want to see me, and I need to respect that. But I do need to get a message to her." "What kind of message?" Sebastian looked down at the documents spread across his desk, papers that would change everything. "I need her to know what I'm doing and why. Even if she never forgives me, she deserves to understand that I finally see what matters." Remy was silent for a moment. "This is serious, isn't it? Not just another strategic move?" "The most serious decision I've ever made," Sebastian confirmed. "I've spent my entire adult life fighting for control of this company, Remy. And now I'm walking away from it all." The admission hung between them, weighty with implication. Sebastian could almost hear his friend processing the magnitude of the statement. "I'll help you get a message to her," Remy finally said. "But Sebastian, are you sure about this?" Sebastian looked around his executive office, at the trappings of power and success he'd spent years accumulating. None of it filled the void Wanda had left behind. "More sure than I've ever been about anything," he replied. That evening, Sebastian carefully composed a letter to Wanda. Not justifications or excuses, she deserved better than that, but a full accounting of what he was doing and why. He included copies of the documents he'd signed that afternoon, evidence that his words weren't empty promises, but binding commitments. When he finished, he sealed everything in an envelope and gave it to Remy to deliver to Trey Reeves' apartment. Whether Wanda would read it, whether she would care, these were questions Sebastian couldn't answer. All he could do was take the actions that might begin to make amends, and hope that somehow, someday, she might understand how completely she'd changed him. The weekend passed in a flurry of legal consultations and paperwork. By Sunday evening, everything was in place for the shareholders' meeting the following day. Sebastian slept little that night, his mind racing with all that would change when the sun rose. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that often follows momentous decisions. Sebastian dressed with particular care, his best suit, the cobalt blue tie Wanda had once said brought out his eyes. Not that his appearance mattered for what he was about to do, but it felt important somehow to face this day as his best self. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Pemberton Tower's Grand Conference Center. As Sebastian's car approached the building, he noticed the unusual number of media vans parked outside. Apparently, word had leaked that something significant was about to happen at one of New York's oldest financial institutions. Security escorted him through a side entrance to avoid the reporters, bringing him to a small conference room where Remy waited. "It's a full house out there," Remy informed him. "Your mother has packed the room with her allies. The board is seated in the front row, looking nervous. And," he hesitated. "And?" Sebastian prompted. "Wanda is here." Sebastian's heart lurched painfully in his chest. "She came?" Remy nodded. "Arrived about 10 minutes ago with her brother. They're seated near the back. She read your letter, Sebastian. I don't know if that's why she's here, but she knows what you're planning to do." The knowledge that Wanda was in that room, that she would witness what was about to happen, filled Sebastian with a complex mix of hope and trepidation. He hadn't expected her to come, hadn't dared to hope she would care enough to witness this moment. "It's time," Sebastian said, gathering his resolve. "Ready?" Remy clapped him on the shoulder. "As ready as you'll ever be to torch your own empire." They entered the conference center through a side door, emerging onto the raised platform where the executive team was already seated. Pamela occupied the center chair, a calculated position of authority, with John Steele beside her, his presence a clear statement about potential future alliances. The room fell silent as Sebastian took his seat at the far end of the table, deliberately distant from his mother. His eyes scanned the audience, finding Wanda almost immediately. She sat straight-backed beside her brother, her expression carefully neutral as their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Pamela opened the meeting with practiced poise, welcoming the shareholders and expressing deep concern about recent developments that threaten the stability and reputation of Pemberton Industries. Her remarks were clearly designed to position Sebastian as a liability, setting the stage for the vote of no confidence she had orchestrated. Sebastian listened without interruption, allowing her to build her case. Only when she finally turned to him, asking if he wished to respond before the vote, did he rise to his feet. "Thank you, Mother," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "I do have a response, though perhaps not the one you're expecting." He stepped to the podium, surveying the room filled with shareholders, board members, and executive staff. Somewhere in the back, Wanda watched, her presence both painful and necessary. "For 15 years, Sebastian began, I've fought for control of this company. I believed I was honoring my father's legacy by protecting his vision from those who would reduce Pemberton Industries to a mere social credential, a company more concerned with maintaining tradition than creating the future." He paused, his gaze finding his mother's coldly furious expression. "In pursuit of that goal, I've made decisions I'm not proud of. I've treated people as assets rather than human beings. I've allowed this corporate war to consume everything else of value in my life. And in doing so, I've betrayed not only others, but my father's true legacy, his belief that business should enhance lives, not destroy them." Murmurs ran through the audience as shareholders exchanged confused glances. This was clearly not the defensive posture they had expected. "Today, you've been called to vote on my continued leadership of Pemberton Industries. But I'm removing that decision from your hands." Sebastian picked up the folder containing the documents he'd prepared over the weekend. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Pemberton Industries." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Pamela half rose from her seat, her composure finally cracking. "Sebastian, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago, Mother," he replied calmly. "I'm choosing what truly matters." He opened the folder, removing the first document. "Additionally, I am divesting my personal shares in Pemberton Industries, 29% of outstanding stock, and transferring them to a newly established employee ownership trust that will ensure this company serves the interests of the people who actually build its success every day." The whispers became outright exclamations. Several board members appeared on the verge of medical distress. Pamela had gone completely pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the table edge. "This decision is final and legally binding," Sebastian continued, holding up the signed transfer documents. "The trust will be administered by an independent board with strict governance provisions to prevent any single individual, including any member of the Pemberton family, from exercising undue control." He closed the folder, his gaze sweeping the room once more. "I entered the corporate world believing that power and control were the measures of success. I was wrong. True success lies in using whatever influence we have to create something meaningful, something that honors our humanity rather than diminishing it." Sebastian's eyes found Wanda in the back of the room. Even from a distance, he could see the shock in her expression, the disbelief at what he was doing. "I recently lost something far more valuable than any company or fortune," he continued, speaking now as if they were the only two people in the room. "I lost the trust and respect of someone who showed me what real strength looks like. Someone who overcame genuine adversity rather than manufacturing conflicts. Someone who achieved success through brilliance and determination rather than inheritance and privilege." Wanda's expression remained unreadable, but she didn't look away. "I don't know if that trust can ever be restored," Sebastian acknowledged, his voice softening. "But I do know that continuing this destructive pattern would make me unworthy of even trying. So I'm choosing a different path, not as another strategic move, but as the first step toward becoming someone guided by principles rather than ambition." He turned back to address the full room. "The legal team will distribute detailed information about the transition. I thank you all for your attention." With that, Sebastian stepped away from the podium, ignoring the chaos that erupted behind him. Board members shouting questions, shareholders demanding explanations, his mother's face contorted with shock and fury. None of it mattered as much as the woman still seated in the back of the room, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sebastian moved down from the platform and began walking up the center aisle, his eyes fixed on Wanda. The crowd parted before him, conversations faltering as people realized where and to whom he was headed. When he reached her row, Trey Reeves stood, physically placing himself between Sebastian and his sister. "Haven't you done enough?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "It's okay, Trey," Wanda said quietly, standing as well. "Give us a minute." Trey looked like he wanted to object, but after a moment of silent communication with his sister, he stepped aside, his protective gaze never leaving Sebastian. Finally, after days that had felt like years, Sebastian stood face to face with Wanda. Up close, he could see the toll the past week had taken on her. Subtle shadows beneath her eyes, a new guardedness in her expression. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Sebastian replied without hesitation. "Not to win you back. I know it's not that simple, but because it was right. Because I finally understood what my father was trying to teach me all those years ago. That legacy isn't about control or power. It's about what you build, what you contribute, how you treat the people in your life." Wanda studied his face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or genuine change. "And what will you do now? Without the company, without the war with your mother, who is Sebastian Pemberton?" It was the most profound question anyone had ever asked him, cutting to the heart of an identity he'd defined through conflict and ambition for so long. "I don't know yet," he admitted honestly, "but I'd like to find out. And I'd like—" He hesitated, then continued with raw vulnerability. "I'd like the chance to show you who I could be. If you're willing to give me that opportunity. Not now, not until you're ready, if you ever are. But someday." Wanda was silent for a long moment, the cacophony of the room fading around them as they stood in their own private space of reckoning and possibility. "I can't make any promises," she finally said. "What happened between us, what I discovered about why you chose me, that isn't something I can just forget." "I wouldn't ask you to," Sebastian assured her. "I only ask for the chance, someday, to show you that the man who wrote that assessment isn't who I am anymore, that he's not who I want to be." Wanda's expression softened slightly. "The man I saw up there today, the one who walked away from everything he's fought for, he's someone I might be interested in getting to know. Eventually. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't reconciliation, but it was a possibility, a door left fractionally open, where before there had been only a wall." Sebastian felt something in his chest loosen, a breath he hadn't known he was holding, finally released. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "Thank you." Trey stepped forward, clearly indicating the conversation was over. "We should go, Wanda." She nodded, gathering her purse. Before turning to leave, she looked at Sebastian once more. "What you did today, giving up your shares, creating that trust, that was a good thing, Sebastian. Whatever else happens between us, I want you to know, I recognize that." With those words, she walked away, Trey's protective arm around her shoulders as they navigated through the still stunned crowd toward the exit. Sebastian stood alone in the middle of the conference center, surrounded by the chaos of what he'd done, watching the woman who had changed everything disappear through the doors. He had no idea what would happen next, with the company, with his mother, with Wanda. For the first time in his meticulously planned life, the future was genuinely uncertain. Yet somehow, that uncertainty felt right. Like the first step on a path toward becoming someone worthy of the trust he'd so carelessly destroyed. Someone who measured success not by what he controlled, but by what he contributed. Someone who understood that real strength came not from power, but from principle. As Sebastian finally turned to face the consequences of his decision, one certainty remained amidst the chaos. Whatever came next, he would face it as a man guided by what truly mattered, not strategic advantage or family legacy, but the simple, profound truth that how we treat the people we love defines us far more than any empire we might build. 2 months later, Sebastian sat at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan where he'd spent most of his professional life. The modest space was filled with the rich aroma of coffee and the gentle hum of conversation, a world away from executive boardrooms and power lunches. Before him lay a stack of papers, architectural plans, budget projections, zoning applications. The Brooklyn Youth Technology Initiative was taking shape, Driven by Sebastian's vision and funded by the portion of his personal fortune he'd retained after divesting from Pemberton Industries. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of fighting his mother over his father's abandoned tech initiatives, he was now building something entirely new, focused on bringing technology education to underserved communities. It felt right in a way his corporate battles never had, a purpose that extended beyond self-interest or family legacy. "Mind if I join you?" Sebastian looked up, his heart stuttering at the familiar voice. Wanda stood beside his table, looking as beautiful as ever in simple jeans and a casual blouse. A far cry from the corporate attire she'd worn during their marriage, but somehow more authentically her. "Please," he said, quickly gathering his papers to make space. "I didn't expect to see you here." Wanda sat down, setting her coffee cup on the table between them. "Trey mentioned he saw you here last week. Said you were working on some kind of youth program." Sebastian nodded, surprised and touched that she'd sought him out. In the 2 months since the shareholders' meeting, they'd had minimal contact. A few text messages, one brief phone call when the divorce papers were filed. He'd respected her need for space, focusing instead on building something meaningful with his life. "The Brooklyn Youth Technology Initiative," he explained, sliding a concept document toward her. "Teaching coding, digital design, entrepreneurship, giving kids from disadvantaged backgrounds the tools to create their own opportunities." Wanda reviewed the document, her expression thoughtful. "This is impressive, Sebastian. Comprehensive programming, sustainable funding model, community partnerships." "Thank you," he said, warmed by her approval. "It's still early days, but we've secured the main facility and hired our first instructors. We should be ready for students by fall." "We?" Wanda asked, raising an eyebrow. "A small team I've assembled. People who believe in the mission." Sebastian hesitated, then added, "No Pembertons involved except me. This isn't about family legacy. It's about creating something genuinely useful." Wanda nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "I've been following the Pemberton Industries situation in the business press. Your mother stepped down as chairwoman last month." "Yes," Sebastian confirmed. "The Employee Ownership Trust has elected a new board, mostly long-term company veterans who actually understand the business. They're implementing your Asian market strategy, by the way. It's already showing promising results." "I know," Wanda said with a small smile. "They offered me my job back." This was news to Sebastian. "Are you considering it?" "No," she replied decisively. "That chapter is closed for me. I've started my own financial consulting firm, actually. Small, focused on helping minority-owned businesses secure funding and scale strategically." "That sounds perfect for you," Sebastian said, genuinely pleased for her. "You always were brilliant at seeing potential others missed." A comfortable silence fell between them, not the charged tension of their final days together, but something gentler, tentative yet hopeful. "How have you been, Sebastian?" Wanda asked finally. "Really?" It was a simple question that demanded an honest answer. Sebastian considered his response carefully. "Changed," he said eventually. "Rebuilding, I suppose. Learning who I am without the company, without the conflict that defined me for so long. Some days are harder than others, but mostly," he met her eyes directly, "mostly I feel more authentic than I ever have before. Like I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be, rather than who circumstances shaped me into." Wanda studied him, her gaze searching as it had been that day in the conference center. "I believe that," she said softly. "I can see it in you." Another silence, this one filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. "I've been thinking about you," Wanda admitted, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "About us, about what happened." Sebastian felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression calm, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "I was so angry," she continued. "Not just because of why you chose me initially, but because somewhere along the way, I'd fallen in love with you. Really in love. Beyond our arrangement. Finding out I was selected as a weapon." She shook her head. "It broke something in me." The admission that she had loved him, truly loved him, sent a wave of both joy and regret through Sebastian. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "More than I can ever express." "I know," Wanda acknowledged. "Your letter, what you did at that meeting. I understand you're genuinely sorry. But that doesn't erase what happened." "No," Sebastian agreed. "It doesn't." Wanda took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for what she wanted to say next. "But I've been wondering lately if what we found together, what grew between us despite how it began, might be worth exploring again. Not picking up where we left off, but starting something new. Something honest from the beginning." The words hung between them, fragile and precious. Sebastian felt a surge of hope so intense it was almost painful. "I would like that," he said quietly. "Very much." Wanda smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Where do we start?" Sebastian asked, willing to follow her lead in this as in so many things. "How about right here?" Wanda suggested. "Tell me more about this youth initiative. I might have some ideas about potential partners in the financial literacy space." And so they began again, not as CEO and strategic asset, not as husband and wife of convenience, but simply as Sebastian and Wanda. Two people sharing coffee and ideas, finding their way toward something authentic and unplanned. As the afternoon light streamed through the cafe windows, illuminating Wanda's face as she leaned forward passionately, describing a mentorship program she'd encountered, Sebastian felt a contentment he'd never known in his years of corporate success. The perfect plan that had brought Wanda into his life had indeed worked too well. It had shattered his carefully constructed walls, forced him to confront his deepest motivations, and ultimately led him to lose everything he thought he wanted, only to discover what he truly needed. My beautiful royal story family, what a journey we've taken together tonight. From strategic manipulation to authentic love, from calculated alliance to heart's true partner, we've witnessed the transformation of two souls that found each other in the most unexpected way. Sebastian thought he could orchestrate love like a business deal, only to discover that the heart has its own agenda that defies even the most brilliant strategic mind. Wanda agreed to a marriage of convenience, never imagining she was signing up for the greatest love story of her life. Together, they learned that sometimes the person you think you're using becomes the person who saves you from yourself. Their story reminds us that love is the ultimate strategy, not because it serves specific objectives, but because it transforms everything it touches, including the people brave enough to choose it. It shows us that it's never too late to choose authenticity over performance, real connection over convenient arrangement, and the messy, beautiful uncertainty of genuine love over the false security of strategic control. What would you sacrifice for someone who makes you feel most like yourself? Have you ever found love in the place you least expected it? Share your thoughts about second chances and the courage it takes to choose love over security in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in the power of authentic love. And don't forget to subscribe to our Royal Story family, because every week, we gather here to celebrate the moments when hearts triumph over strategy, when love conquers fear, and when two souls brave enough to be vulnerable create something more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. Tomorrow brings another story of hearts finding their way home, another journey of love conquering the odds. Until then, remember that you are the author of your own love story, and the most strategic thing you can ever do is choose with your heart. Sweet dreams, my beautiful family. Sweet dreams.